This museum is under the auspices of the Nebraska Jewish Historical Society, and these two very nice ladies are both connected and make that society work, and I'll turn the program over to them for right now. A little later on, I have something on the Kapolya Shul and on our data.
I'll give you a quick rundown. I'm Barbara Russell. I'm the archivist of the Historical Society. I'm not from Omaha, so some things you guys probably know better than I do. I've been here 3 years, but in 3 years I've had a major crash course in Omaha Jewish history. The building you're in, this room you're in, of course it was funded by Steve's parents and your relatives, and includes a special space for what was called the Riekes Shul. But this space, the guts of this space and what we've tried to recreate here was once called the Kapolya Shul. The Kapolya Synagogue actually is two congregations that combine. One of them started in this building in a church. They purchased a church. It burned, and they fronted the building so that it then looked like this from about the 30s on, and you can still see the Gothic windows, but they moved their stars on the front of the building, and it had its name. I told the story a little while ago that in the late 40s, Kellum School in downtown, at its location 24th and Nimbus, was building a swimming pool. So the congregation didn't want to see their building torn down, so they jacked it up, stuck it on a truck, and tried to take it down 24th Street, but it got stuck under telephone wires in the winter, stayed there until the spring when it could land at 33rd and Cummins, which it did. And this is a picture of where it's at. You guys can come see this later, but it's next to what was called the Labor Lyceum. And that's where the building still is. Also in the late 40s, the group of congregants of this building joined together with another group of congregants from this building. They were both from different areas of Russia, but they both seemed to think they were from the same area, which was Kupol, a little town outside of Slutsk, and hence the name of Kapolya Shul. There actually are a few Kapolya Shuls around the country from people who are from Kapolya. There are a lot of people in Omaha who still trace back to Kupol, and the current spelling is K-O-P-Y-L. So these are artifacts in the different buildings. One of your relatives has asked me which building still exists. This one still exists. It's the Greek Orthodox Church. It's the second temple. The first temple was a little wood frame building. This is the second one. This, of course, was refronted. The building still stands, but it is an air conditioning company. These two are the Orthodox synagogue downtown, and they're both gone. This is the first conservative synagogue in Lincoln, and it still stands, but it's an apartment building. This one still stands. It's half of what this became. It is now a black tabernacle church of something. This is the first Bethel, the first conservative synagogue here, and it's now a architecture firm. And that's the new Bethel. That's the temple that is now. That's the conservative synagogue in Lincoln that still is. This is the Orthodox synagogue here now, which is where all the membership of all the Orthodox congregations went. That's on 52nd Street. That's Beth Israel. The Riekes Shul, which is no longer. This is Council Bluffs Synagogue, which still is. This is the temple in Lincoln. And that is the oldest standing building still used for Jewish services. It was started for Jewish services, still used for Jewish services. This is the South Omaha Synagogue, which still stands, but it is a Latino church now. And that's the first temple in this one.
Could I point out something on Bethel Synagogue?
Please.
Fritzy and Art were married there, so your grandma was married at that synagogue right there, and Nancy and Mars were married in the synagogue. I married the kid's father, Ray Somberg, in that synagogue. Who else? Did I get everybody here? Yeah, I think that's everybody, but there were lots of Riekes grandchildren married there.
And Barn by Mitzvah.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where all
Well,
our
Bethel was, Sam Bieber was one of the founders of Bethel Synagogue.
He was the first president.
Was he the first president? Who?
Uncle
Okay,
Sam?
taking notes.
Ann, are you
Wasn't
taking
Uncle
notes,
Sam the
Ann?
first person?
And I mentioned the parents.
My parents got married.
Did I say that? I meant to say it. I was trying to go around the room. Janie and Floyd got married
Yes, I think
there.
they got
Right.
I'm sorry, I was trying to get everybody.
Yeah.
I saw a movie of my
No,
father's
I was, I was in your parents' wedding at that synagogue.
Steve wants to say something about the Riekes Synagogue, which I don't know a lot about, but we do have space over there, which has pictures. It is the original curtain from, you can see in the picture, that was the curtain, and the Rimonim from the Torah that was used in what was called the Riekes Shul. We also have some tickets in here, because at one time, we were also calling this Sha'arei Zion, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
The real name of the synagogue that none of us probably ever knew,
Right.
maybe Uncle Mort knew, it had a real name. It was called Sha'arei Zion,
Right.
Gates of Zion.
We have high holiday tickets that they actually printed so that you could come.
Um,
And we have them in our case.
There was a piece that I found we were going to give to the Historical Society. I thought they had it. I don't know who wrote this, but it was written by someone who was very familiar with what is called, what we all know as the Riekes Shul, which was 2 doors down from their house on North 19th. Apparently before 1939, however, it was located in various places in the Jewish ghetto, if you want to call it, on the near north side. And according to this, that when they built the Logan Fontanelle housing project, which was the first public housing project in which our Uncle Phil Klesnick was very, very instrumental, they had to move the congregation. So they moved it to the Arzeda bought the house 2 doors down in 1939, and they moved it there. And this guy then describes, I don't want to, it's a long piece, but it is extremely colorful. Just to give an example, he said that this synagogue was a real classic old-time shtippel, old-time Orthodox. And he said that there were splintered seats and hard floors and so forth. He said for the stout-hearted who needed a schmeck of tobacco, a sniff of tobacco, he said there were homemade snuff boxes containing a particular brand of tobacco that seemed to guarantee to always produce a violent sneeze. I mean, whoever wrote this was just, and he described some of the, maybe it's that picture, I'm not too sure, a pair of bookcases and the tin tray with yard-side glasses, and one shown burning on a standard reading stands. Maybe Mr. Riekes' personal one is shown. I don't know if that's it. And an old clock which never worked. He said in the kitchen over the sink, sign proudly admonished in Yiddish, "Don't spit in the sink." And it had this special kind of musty kind of sound. He said, and then he goes in to describe this group of old-time shul members, as might be expected, created a very lively atmosphere. During the non-davening intervals, there were many heated discussions on various subjects carried on in a concoction of Yiddish and broken English delivered at breakneck speed. The attitude was mainly tongue-in-cheek. When everyone spoke at the same time, as it usually happened, it was bedlam. On more than one occasion, an argument ended with at least one person stalking out the door, promising never to return, but they often returned. Arguments were more like a scene from a comic opera than anything serious, and there weren't too many of them, but there were enough. So with all the goings on, there was seldom a dull moment at Sha'arei Zion. So the dues were minimal, and it was customary to bring in a little extra cash during those times. Tickets were sold for high holidays. Aliyahs were auctioned off in the typical sing-song fashion. And they talk about the food and the delicacies, and including the 100-proof liquor. And he says that shortly after this is kind of interesting, shortly after the move, Perhaps because the shul was experiencing some financial difficulties or just lack of interest on the part of the members, or whatever the reason, Mr. Riekes slowly assumed full responsibility on his own by taking care of all necessary expenses. He took this step because he possibly felt the shul was in danger of closing. Election of officers and membership dues were soon dropped, but nothing else changed except the aliyahs were still auctioned off for several more years. Everyone was welcome free of charge. This was a very unusual action because few shuls are ever financed by one individual alone. This made Shir Zion a most unique synagogue in Omaha and probably elsewhere. The shul then began to be known unofficially as the Riekes Shul, but sometimes it was also called the Little Shul on 19th Street. However, one had to be careful referring to the 19th Street Shul without causing undue confusion, because there was a second one on Bird Street. I don't know. Anyway, then the talk about then after they had died, it continued and so forth and so on. But this is a marvelous piece which we will try to duplicate, and it goes on. But it's written in a very colorful language with many little vignettes of an Orthodox shul. Unfortunately, it's not standing, and this is what we have left of it. But one of the Sefer Torahs is still owned by our family and is located through a legal agreement with B'nai B'rith at the Sand Beaver Camp in Wanago, Wisconsin. And should that camp ever discontinue, we will have a Torah back in the family, but hopefully that won't happen. So I wanted to bring to you all that little bit of information. And one other thing that my dad would say if he were here today, and that was this. My dad loves to tell stories. This is I don't know how exactly you know how they do it. Yes, right. Yeah. Yeah, they sang it. My dad said at the synagogue, he loved it because there'd always be somebody some man who looked like that. It said, "With the women in the balcony, please shut up. Please be quiet." Love to really bang on that clapper. So, yeah.
So when you're done with that story, I have
Okay.
things to add. At the Riekes synagogue, unlike this synagogue where the women were up high, there was a room off to the side where the women were. Now when I went there, I was little enough so I could sit next to Dad and braid his tallis. But all the other women couldn't really see what was going on because we were in an adjoining room and you were looking at a wall. You could hear the men daven. Am I right, Dad? But the women weren't allowed in the room where the Torah was.
That was the dining room.
Yeah, you were in the living room, we were in the dining room, but the little ones got to come in. But it must have been Yom Kippur when they had the memorial service. We children were rushed out of the synagogue. We were not allowed to hear the memorial service. Like if we heard it, it must have been like bad luck or like a superstition.
Well, you weren't supposed to hear the crying.
Was that the crying? I thought it was the prayers. It was the crying that we weren't supposed to hear.
If you haven't experienced death, you shouldn't experience the synagogue by watching your parents and crying.
And I just wanted to add two other things about this synagogue here. My husband Irv, at the time of the dedication of this synagogue, was a couple months before he passed away, and this was probably the last public community event he came to, and that was when the synagogue was dedicated. And Irv was bar mitzvah in this Kupolder shul. So I said to him, "Does this look anything like the shul?" And he said, "This is the shul." The other thing is that, excuse me, Dad was reading one of the Historical Society newsletters, and he saw that they were looking for an endowment for the Ark. So Dad endowed the Ark in Mother's name, and Mother, of course, is Henry Riekes' sister. So Ruthie Riekes Richards, her name is on the Ark.
The picture of this man, this is Rabbi Rodinsky. And Rabbi Grudinsky happened to have married my parents, officiated the wedding. But Rabbi Grudinsky was known as the Rav in Omaha. He was so admired and looked up to because he was such a great scholar. And he is. He was a world-class scholar. I read a law review written by him from Yeshiva law school in English, but he was really apparently quite a scholar, and that's his picture, and he happened to marry my parents. I don't know a whole lot else about him. I think there's some scholarly works being about him and his works being undertaken. Maybe Uncle Mort, you know something more about
Not
it.
about his work, but I can tell you that about when he passed away, in the middle of the night, your Aunt Ruthie and I, after I called one of my truck drivers, got a truck and drove to his home, and he passed away. And they carried him and put him in the truck after wrapping him in a shroud and sent him across the river to Des Moines, Iowa, where he would be buried, and they plot that his family were caught out without having him being embalmed, because that's not kosher. And so they called us to tell us this, and they just figured we should handle it, we could work it, and that's how we got the last thing in his life that happened.
Because he couldn't go across, they couldn't take a deceased body across state lines.
Right.
There are taking bodies in the middle.
You can tell that story because the statute of limitations.
Dad Riekes considered Rabbi Grudinsky as the only rabbi in Omaha. As far as Dad Riekes was concerned, the rest of the rabbis, phew.
Well, we don't want to get into that too much. The other stories about my parents' wedding, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I've heard a lot of stories. The famous story is that my dad got a little, his friends tanked him up a little bit, and he walked down the aisle, supposedly tipping his hat a little bit.
This was true, I was there.
I think Dad was one of the culprits.
But
Getting him drunk. Uncle Henry.
Yes, I was the culprit.
You were responsible
Dave
for
Bernstein
it.
helped me. We stayed downstairs at that Cottonwood room in the Blackstone Hotel, and Dave and I sat with him till he'd had a few drinks. And then we went up, and Uncle Henry went down the aisle. And here's the way he went down the aisle.
And didn't he have book and Zeta under each arm? You were so short, he was so tall.
So tall that he would sort of say, "So glad you're here, so nice to see you." Can we give you all this Rachel's name?
Sure.